Hey guys, this video was actually meant to come out a few days ago, and I've really gone back and forth on how to even approach this video with tons of revisions, and I am very open to feedback if people want to hear me try and cover this topic in a different style, so let me know in the comments if you have a better approach in mind, and trust me, I am definitely open to changing that. So with 4 healers in Endwalker, we're facing the question of what combinations do we have? What healers should we take to a particular encounter, and which ones should we avoid in terms of combinations? Really exploring all of these questions is actually going to be invaluable. So the first question that I need to answer, because this is very important, is that all my research as well as asking many friends of mine in the community has led me to the conclusion that absolutely all combinations will be very viable in all content. And honestly, through the discussions, one thing really came up a lot was depending on the encounter design, your healers in your group may even want to change what healers that they play to approach that particular encounter differently. This should be very accessible because your healer role shares all of the same gear other than weapon, obviously. Like for Pandemonium 1, you might want White Mage and Scholar. P2S you might want Sage Astro, P3S Ast Scholar, and P4S you might even want Sage Scholar. And yes, you could even say Sage Scholar, which I know is pretty crazy, but I'm going to explain in a few minutes why that definitely is something that could be possible with some planning. Because the last time I tried to do this, it bloated up to like 50 minutes in length. And it could have probably even gone longer than that if I went and did a super deep dive. I am assuming that everyone knows what's up with the current state of healers like Ast Scholar, White Mage Scholar, and all these different combinations. I'm going to lightly touch over them, as well as I'm assuming that you already know what the Sage's toolkit is. But if you aren't familiar with any of that kind of stuff, there are videos on my channel already. Like I have a Sage mechanics and the abilities video. I have like the healer meta video in Endwalker. Like check those out if like something is like, whoa, what? That came from left field. So my approach here is that I'm going to really be going into the pros and cons of each combination and explaining really the biggest pain points that they might have. Let's start off with the pure healer combination, White Mage and Astro. So White Mage and Astro are both bringing a marvelous amount of healing, and the reactive playstyles are extremely strong. To say the absolute least, it is going to be far easier to course correct excessive mistakes, since the White Mage, actually the White Mage especially, is especially famous for its incredibly deep reserves, where Scholar has a legacy of so-called running out of gas, which if you played Scholar for long enough, you've probably said those words yourself, which is just the state of when the Scholar runs out of all cooldowns, all Aether Flow stacks are gone, but this combination of White Mage Ast never really needs to worry about that, especially the White Mage. But here is kind of like the flip side. The pure healers' regens do stack and don't really suffer the well-known shield overlap problem that Scholar and Nocturnal Astrologian have had a long legacy, like a 6-year legacy of having that problem. White Mage and Diurnal Ast, however, can sometimes feel like they're stepping on one another's toes. What I mean by that is because both of them bring so much powerful reactive healing, the White Mage can be like, okay, well I had like 4 cooldowns still up that could have easily solved that, and Ast's like, well, I wanted to do that. That kind of thing. Obviously, like E12S right now has pushed that boundary where a lot of groups actually prefer White Mage and Diurnal Ast just because it has so much healing and they don't step on each other's toes, but I'm talking about like most forms of content, it'll be like, whoa, we don't need that much reactive healing. On the flip side, the Astro, however, is a true hybrid and can put out shields with 20% increased power every 2 minutes for 20 seconds, adding up for a total potency currently in game of 300 for their aspected Helios. And that's really the true power of Neutral Sect and is extremely insanely strong. If this encounter allows you to sit on Neutral Sect until the necessary time to mitigate, that's going to overcome that pitfall. Here's where the encounter design concerns come full into question. If the shielding of the party becomes a consistent problem into Endwalker where you need to mitigate damage at 60-second or lower intervals, this could become a problem for the White Mage Ast composition. Not that they couldn't heal it off if they survived, but it becomes a matter of what mechanics do we see that necessitate barriers and mitigation that we can't just eat and get dropped down to 10% and burst heal through. That is really the $1,000,000 question of maybe P1S, Pandemonium is the next Savage tier in case anyone doesn't know what I mean by that, but maybe P1S will be easier to tackle with a different set of healers than P2S or P4S, which depending on the needs of barriers or lack thereof will really determine what is going on. Like I said in my recent barriers video, the only HP that actually truly matters in this game is the last one, that one single HP. If you never hit that, there's no need for a White Mage Ast composition to ever worry. The last problem is that while their reactive healing is undeniably stupid powerful, in high-end play, casting regen is generally considered suboptimal, and this is backed up when you look at White Mages and how often, or Unoften they cast regen, which results in less consistent background healing than the Scholar and Sage do through Cardia or the Fairy passively healing, and they don't sacrifice any GCDs for that, so that's all basically free. And viewing again actual Savage data on Fairy Embrace, this does really add up as one of the highest HP per second contributors in the game, and especially with how powerful and flexible Cardia is that I've gone on length at this channel about it, it is something that we can only expect to be an even more significantly pronounced effect for the Sage that can actually target and determine where their healing's going with Cardia. To end this section off, I want a reality check moment. We see this composition already in current content, so me speculating on this could maybe be good, that could maybe be good, no. We factually see White Mage and Diurnal Ast in current content. We've seen people prog with it, and it's undeniably a very, very strong composition. Neutral Sect popped at the right intervals, as I said earlier, shrugs off the damage like it's a complete joke. This composition already has and does clear E12S without much problem, and has been, for a few groups, the preferred approach. Going into Endwalker, it would be no surprise if we saw this very plentiful composition. Now let's talk about the barrier healers. People are probably most scared about this composition, including myself at first, but checking the Scholar and Sage kits myself and with friends, I've really hashed out the kits with them, and honestly, I really do see this as being perfectly viable too, even though it will probably be a lot trickier to pull off in pugs. And to be blunt, I mean, when I say that, a little communication and knowing who is doing what at what time so you don't cooldown waste is going to go an excessively long way with this composition. It's going to be pretty unforgiving if everyone is blowing all their cooldowns. Like, imagine if Sage and Scholar both pop with Spring Dawn equivalents, that would be Physis for the Sage. Imagine if they also pop Fey Blessing, which is holism in the Sage. Like, basically, if you are wasting all these cooldowns and doing a lot of overhealing with them, you will struggle a lot more. But communication with this composition will pay off. Which really gets me into saying that I've already covered on this channel comparing the Sages and the Scholar's kit at length, and they are pretty much the exact same kits for like 85% of the kit. The other 15% is where the Sage diversifies into significantly more healing options, especially AoE healing options, and the Scholar diversifies into more powerful barrier options, and especially AoE barriers, such as where the Sage gets a 300 potency Medica equivalent and Physis 2 and Panheima, which are all going to be extremely powerful AoE heals. The Scholar gets Seraph with its bigger stacking Constellations shield spam. It gets deployment tactics to spread that huge single target galvanized shield. Remember, never catalyze, guys. Don't think you can get away with that anymore. But they can spread that galvanize across the party, and dissipation that can also help the Scholar produce even bigger shields. Like, these are significant tools, not to mention Fey Illumination, 10% more berries. All of these are definitely a huge factor in that. But further from that, the takeaway that I want everyone to take is that the Sage is so similar to the Scholar that they are going to, in a combination, have a metric ton of options and more on top of it to restore health. But these are all really tied to cooldowns. So the problem is really when crap hits the fan, they start to run out of these options, such as Indom is amazing. Good luck finding someone who's healed that won't say, yeah, an instant burst of healing's really, really weak. Who's saying that? Especially when you recitation in Dom, that is very, very powerful. The real trick is that is true until you have no Aether Flow. But let's not forget that this duo will have in the background the Fairy and Cardia non-stop healing off chip damage, and proper Cardia weaving from the Sage to maximize it will be a very huge factor. This is going to be very high value without any GCDs dedicated. A major consideration will be in that both Sage and Scholar using mitigation to reduce the incoming damage and barriers to alleviate the spikes of damage before they come in will allow their lighter raw HPS reactive kits to have more space to breathe. That is what it's really going to come down to with this comp. Improper mitigation and not using proactive barriers properly will cause heavy spikes that will cause emergency tools like Physis 2 on a 180-second cooldown, Indoms, Whispering Dawns, Fey Blessings, and the like to all be blown and be like, oh my god, we need to get back up before this other AoE hits, which is undeniably the single biggest problem of this entire composition. If they aren't addressing damage before it comes in, they will run out of gas. Like I said earlier in the video when we were talking about White Mage and Ast, as any Scholar knows, when the Scholar runs out out of gas, it runs out of gas hard. And this impacts the Sage very much as well, because the kit is like 85% the exact same kit, but the Sage does have more AoE options to try and alleviate that. But really, like I was like hinting on a little bit ago, the flip side is that there's going to be nothing short of a disgusting amount of mitigation. Sacred Soil uptime can theoretically be 100% between the two, which is in and of itself a pretty fantastic AoE heal. But I want to elaborate a little bit on barriers. Between Sage and Scholar, almost no major raid-wide AoE should spike the entire party's health. If it does, then one of the two didn't do their responsibility, or they didn't communicate properly. They should be splitting responsibly and like, how to say it, form like a real rhythm of who combines what cooldowns to do barrier stack. An example would be one interval the Scholar uses Dissipation Deployment Tactics for a 500 potency shield, the next interval the Sage uses Panhaima Eucrasia for 500 potency shield, the next interval the Scholar is going to take off with Seraph Constellation and Fey Illumination with Succor for a big burst of heal. Bleh, shield I mean. That should always be on the forefront of this composition's healers. They should be thinking rhythm, mitigation strategy, who's going first, who's going second, who's going third, fourth, fifth. That should all be on their brain, and that's gonna really be what's preventing them from running out of gas, and instead let them take that damage intake very smoothly and softly like ice cream, which, as I said earlier, will allow their weaker reactive healing toolkits to really actually be able to breathe. Building space to breathe is really what I'm thinking with this comp. Now this gets into the problem of the Sage, which I really should do a video on how we haven't gotten a how to say it. During the live letter Yoshi P showed the hotbars, I am 99.9% sure we haven't seen, even on the toolbars, the icon for the single target Serpent Sting ability. But this is really the problem of the Sage, is the Sage is rewarded for barriers being broken with a charge of Serpent Sting that they can blow on what we already know is the AoE version of Toxicon. The single target version I'm gonna also lump in here, though we have no idea on name or icon. And then people can easily look at the White Mage's Lily system and be like, okay, Afflatus is meant to make up for the lost casts of GCDs, and so that's how that works. And so that is really what the basis of my understanding of what we have or will see with the Sage's kit is here. But how to say it, the main thing is that raid buff windows is going to be where the DPS loss is at. Like Dragoon's Battle Litany, the Dancer's going to have Tactical Step Out, we are going to see Ninja's Trick Attack. These damage amplifiers is where you want to funnel all your GCDs, and a Sage will want 3 charges of Serpent Sting going into raid buff windows so they can hammer the single target over and over and over into a 15-second window. So this is likely to be the one major pitfall of the Sage's kit, because they're going to be like, damn dude, I wanted my shield to break. However, I am going to say that's not going to like absolutely make the Sage useless. Like, we're talking about like fringe DPS optimization here. If you're just a progression raiding group, this is going to make absolutely no difference. This isn't going to make the difference between in range timers or not. DPSing in general as a Sage, however, well. But this is like hairs with like optimization. So like regardless though, like I said at the onset of this section, is that this will definitely be a very viable composition. It will be able to overcome content, and in fact I think that there will be quote unquote challenge groups explicitly trying to clear Savage after their initial clears with this composition, and really me and all the friends that I've talked to think that that's definitely going to be a thing. But the real question is, as I brought up too many times at this point, communication. Big important with this comp. Let's talk White Mage and Scholar, which again, we've already really seen this succeed over and over again in the current game. This is undeniably a composition that works very well together. White Mage is never going to run out of gas and is really an unending well of healing, and then Scholar can bring in that deep shielding, mitigation, emergency heals like Indoms, the Lustrates. The Scholar really complements the White Mage a lot, and the Scholar is helping smooth that damage intake a lot too, which the White Mage can't really do to the same level. Honestly, it's a composition that has been the bread and butter of Final Fantasy XIV since Scholar was introduced in 2.0. It's a classic. It's been through all forms of content forever, and in Endwalkers, like literally the most pure of the pure healers with the most barrier-tastic of the healers. There really should not be a problem ever with this composition, as they really do cover each other's weaknesses. They don't step on each other's toes in any way. Slow chip damage is going to be resolved by the fairy in the background, letting the White Mage heal more. Damage is softened by the Scholar's large array of barriers and mitigation. And really on the flip side, the Scholar should never ever need to run out of gas with a good White Mage. They really don't step on one another's toes. I cannot emphasize this enough. It's like an ideal composition. Hence, I'm just gonna move on to the next. Everyone knows this is good. Now let's talk about Sage and White Mage, and while this might make the comments spicy, me and everyone that I'm really talking to see this as being potentially one of the most dominant healer compositions in Endwalker. The Sage right now, with our pretty clear picture of the entire kit, does fall a significant bit shorter than the Scholar, only able to combine Panheima with Eucrasia Prognosis for a 425 potency barrier every 2 minutes. Otherwise, they are relegated to basic Eucrasia Prognosis barriers, which at current Sakura values, and looking at the footage of Yoshi P casting it, does look like a 225 potency barrier. So this is significantly less impressive padding than the Scholar at higher intervals, where the Scholar can do like a 500 potency barrier every 60 seconds pretty easily by managing their cooldowns. We are seeing a much more restricted pool of that with the Sage. But the $1,000,000 question, which is what I keep saying here, is how much mitigation and barriers do we actually need for these encounters? And that should be the question everyone is really asking with this. And I and many others have the hunch that Sage should be more than ample given encounter design, likely will not force the Scholar to be absolutely mandatory. That's not really that realistic. And in fact, with proper mitigation like tanks using Reprisal, the Gunbreaker using Heart of Light, all of these things need to be taken into consideration, as we might not even need barrier healers at all, which is what I was really saying with the Ast White Mage combination. $1,000,000 question. But now this is where I need to talk about the rest of the Sage's toolkit, where the Sage really has an expanded reactive toolkit and an extremely potent cardia system that can alleviate a lot more pressure off of the reactive healing side, healing up after the damage, and make the White Mage able to sit even more at ease and use their cooldowns at more particular moments. It's just flat out more raw healing at times to assist. But on the flip side of the Ast and White Mage combo, the Sage has that consistent access to shields, which can be very important if there are more than 2-minute intervals where damage needs to be softened on intake. Plus the Sage's mitigation, that is Sacred Soil equivalent or Numa or Tarokole, is going to be so much larger array than Ast that it has a far greater capacity to reduce damage, which can also be very appealing for this combination. So really the takeaway is that let's not kid ourselves. This composition here will be excellent. Sage and White Mage actually might become the dominant healer composition if massive barriers on low intervals aren't necessary, which is very unlikely. They won't force the Scholar to be the must pick. Sage's persistent barrier and damage reduction, as well as ample healing, might be more than enough to go with the White Mage, and so I definitely see this being like something definitely to look at. I see this, and many others see this, as like the comp. Now let's talk Astro with the Sage, and this is again another combination that I think has the chance to become the dominant composition, right beside White Mage Sage. Astro and Sage are both the hybrids of the pure healer and the barrier healer category. They both have solid amounts of their respective quality of pure barrier or pure healing or whatever, you know what I mean. That's gonna be like a tongue twister that I'm saying for the next few years. It's gonna be like pure barrier here, blah, blah, blah. But my point is that they definitely are in their category. Astro is no slouch in healing. Sage is still bringing the barriers and mitigation. But the nice thing about Sage is that it is bringing more AoE healing capacity than the Scholar, which makes up for the Astro's slightly fewer tools than White Mage. The Sage also brings persistent healing through Cardia in the background, which is definitely a huge perk. Astro's powerful Nutrasect skill can be interleaved at 60-second windows with the Sage's Panheima Eucratia's Prognosis combo that we talked about before for the 425 potency barrier. Astro's is going to be 300 potency, and that is going to basically ensure that at least at 1-minute intervals that the party will have incredible amounts of padding that will make smooth damage intake and allow the Astro's still very powerful pure healer kit to easily handle the damage. Both also bring in solid raw damage mitigation as well. But this is going to be bringing up the same problem for the Sage as it did with Sage Scholar, is the Sage wants their shields to be broken. This is how they get Serpent Sting procs, and they want to funnel those into the raid buff window. So every 2 minutes the Sage will probably be like, well damn dude, I want my Serpent Sting proc, which maybe the Sage can make up for that by just casting a single target barrier on like a super squishy person and have that break, because you know that a single target barrier is going to be stronger than the 300 potency neutral sec barrier. So that might be the way to alleviate it. They might still do that even with the Scholar. Who knows, but that is an option. But like, guys, like this composition, aside from that one little thing, has basically everything. Heals, tons of shields whenever they need it. They have absolutely lots of healing. This is a very powerful composition. And like I said with like White Mage Sage, we are likely to see this become the dominant composition. This composition simply wants for absolutely nothing, and they are extremely complementary. Now let's talk about Astro and Scholar, and this is again going to very obviously be a powerful combo. We already see it in game right now. It is like the speedrun composition. It's like Astro Scholar. It's like go through the top 50 rankings of like E12S, and it's like, oh, that's a lot of Scholar Ast. So like, guys, this will obviously work. This will obviously be powerful. It is more than fine. But if I need to talk about this in general, Astro can make up a metric ton of healing, but not quite as much as White Mage, which is just bizarre health bursts. Like Planetary Indulgence plus Afflatus Rapture is ridiculous. There is, however, slightly higher risk of the Scholar running out of gas because the Astro isn't the same Energizer battery heal dispenser of unabated ridiculousness that White Mage is. But when I say that, I need to very carefully say, this is nowhere even close to the level of risk of like Skull or Sage, where you better hold your chimichangas because you're at real risk of running out of gas if derailed. Another nice thing is that there will always be a good answer for incoming damage. Every single time there will be a good answer. Ast, Scholar are also extremely complementary. There will be a solid heal to land back on because of Ast's extremely powerful pure healing toolkit and Scholar's very powerful answers for emergency heals like Indom. One caveat may be depending on things, and like when I bring up these barrier numbers, realize I'm really picking at straw and hairs and like splitting hairs over here. Neutral sect and Astro's barriers may not be objectively, numbers wise, theoretically rather, the most powerful barriers that you can have. Quoted, Ast neutral sect AoE potency is 300. Scholar's barriers can hit almost 700 potency in burst, but in reality that is, and I should 700 is not the stupid janky dissipation Seraph nonsense either, which gets even higher, but 700 potency is definitely a possible burst for the Scholar. But if we're talking about like splitting shields, the Scholar can split easily into 500 potency every 60 seconds when they're splitting their cooldowns properly. But it's just like, even if you look at current footage, and thank you to everyone that I've talked to who has like definitely done like the ass combination with this, it's just like where the Scholar might use all of their shields to get rid of the initial terminal relativity burst window, the Astro in this instance doesn't really care about using their neutral sect as a mitigation, but they care about using neutral sect's shield component as specifically just more HPS padding, which makes them in prog able to literally laugh at terminal relativity's more painful later burst spikes. They're just like, oh haha, rather than just have like a 200 potency AoE heal or 240 AoE potency heal, now I have a 300 shield on top of that, so basically every few seconds I am literally spamming out like 500-ish potency of barrier plus heal, but I only care about it for the mitigation of these big bursts, and so Asts really laugh all the way to the bank. They're not even caring about using it as a mitigation. And this is really where it's just like theory versus practice starts to like go kind of crazy. But I'm sure at this point with me explaining it, everyone gets what I mean there. At that point you don't really give a crap if it's like mitigation. It's just like, it's just pure HPS. Anyhow, this video still bloated up more than I wanted to, my god. But guys, like I said before, I'm open to feedback on how to like make this video work. Any modifications you might want to it. I am definitely reading the comments, but let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. For me, I think the number one takeaway I want to tell people is play what you want to play. That is the number one thing at the end of the day. If you play something that you enjoy, you're going to want to get better at it, you're going to have more fun, and at the end of the day, it's a video game. Have fun. I think that's the most important thing to take away from this. Is just like, don't worry about specific